bit late. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer, and welcome to the episode 2 of the FireTalks series, an initiative dedicated to highlighting women professionals, but also tackling very important gender empowerment, women empowerment topics in our industry. So today we are lucky to be joined by our very own Tobias Steffen, co-founder of Women at Refractories and also Research Associate and Innovation Managers at the Forschungsgemeinschaft Feuerfest. He will be talking about how to be a male ally. So without further ado, I will give the floor to you, Toby.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Jennifer. And also, without further ado, let's head into the talk. So imagine you're sitting in a meeting and you have an idea, you bring it up and no one reacts. Well, 10 minutes later, a colleague says the same thing. And suddenly everyone says, well, that's a great idea, Patrick, or insert every other male name in the situation. And that isn't a hypothetical scenario. It happens to women every day. And me, I was part of the problem for a long time, and without even realizing that. So my name is Tobias. I do research in a fairly male-dominated field. And today I'm talking about why I personally am a feminist as a man, and not because I'm a saint, but because I've realized that equality concerns us all. And men, they do have a superpower that they often don't use, and that's privilege. And so I learned early on what it means to kind of belong to marginalized groups and to enjoy fewer privileges than others and to feel, let's say at best, like a satellite of an active social ecosystem. And that's probably why I've had an intrinsic and extreme aversion to inequality, but also to exclusion since childhood. And I've encountered a variety of such phenomena in my professional career, and even in areas that are clearly dominated by women, such as the nursing, where I spent a very formative part of my life. And don't get me wrong, the same problems exist there, but on a completely different scale than in the technical and the scientific fields, which are mainly dominated by men. And that is why I launched Women at Refractories, an initiative together with my colleagues Kerstin and Charlotte. And it's an initiative that sees itself as both a safe space and also a network for women within the refractory industry. But however, we are not exclusively for women, but we're inclusive of all genders, meaning that men are also very welcome and even expressively desired, and they are necessary to release our shared vision, which is the gender equality in the refractories industry, and also a diverse, modern, and cosmopolitan industry that is also a potential employer for young people, and who, as we know, place a great value on modern and diverse work cultures. And they prefer these in direct comparison with other backwards-looking industries. So over the last 2 years, this rather small German initiative at the European Center for Refractories has grown into an international association of people who are working together to promote a modern, inclusive, and diverse refractory industry. And that's not a matter of course in times when, let's say, arch conservative and aggressive forces are trying to undo all the achievements in the field of equality that have been made over the past decades. And we men play a major role in defending these hard-won fundamental rights. And that is precisely why I would like to offer some ideas today on we as men can be allies for women, and above all, why we as men should do so, explicitly in the interests of all men. But let's start with the necessity of male allyship. And male allyship is indispensable for women. Equality is not a women's issue, it's a complete societal process. And women have been fighting for their rights for centuries, but without the comprehensive and active support of men, who still occupy a majority of the positions in powers in many areas, such as the politics, in business, and in science. And this dramatically slows down the progress of reaching real equality. So explicit examples of such inequalities include structural barriers, such as the glass ceiling, an invisible barrier that prevents advancement, or the glass cliff, where women are only appointed to leadership positions in crisis situations and then blamed for the failures. And as allies, men can actively break down these barriers by specifically promoting women, supporting mentoring programs, and even questioning sexist structures. And another point is that the issue of equality is taken even more seriously when men are committed to it. So, for example, a 2017 study by the Harvard Business Review showed that women's ideas are only heard when men take them up. And that's the so-called amplification effect. And therefore, male allies can act as the amplifiers and make the female voices way more audible. And in addition, women who openly advocate for equality are often labeled as bitchy or aggressive. But when we as men make the same demands, however, we are suddenly considered reasonable or progressive. And that is just a small sample of why the active participation by men can make a decisive difference to equality. But there are also very good reasons for men to position themselves as the male allies and stand up for a new image of society. And when we look at the patriarchal construct of the last centuries or even millennia, the traditional role models that have emerged damage men in many ways. And for one thing, men have, for example, a suicide rate 3 times higher than women. And why is that so? Because we were raised never to show weakness. But the allyship and being a male ally allows us to show emotions and thus reducing psychological stress. And in addition to that, the limited life plans means that men do not follow the breadwinner model, are also often ridiculed by society or, let's say, considered inferior in direct comparison. And here, the male allyship in its various facets can also enable men to develop new identities, for example, through parental leave or doing care work or work in professions that are historically dominated by women. And in addition, the toxic competition, so the pressure of the patriarchal mindset to force men into a winner-loser mentality also often leads to loneliness instead of healthy interpersonal relationships. And that results in increasing isolation. So here, too, the male allyship can encourage cooperation instead of competition, while relieving the man of the constant pressure to always be strong. And I could list countless other reasons why the male allyship is necessary for both women and men. But let's say, given the limited time available, just let's move on to how we as men can actively help and what that might look in rather concrete terms. So where do we start when we want to talk about the best becoming a male ally? And first and foremost, it's important to remember us that this is a process and nobody's perfect and we all make mistakes, myself included. And the important thing is to learn from your mistakes, reflect on your own behavior, and consistently work on becoming a better ally. But in my opinion, the most important point and the basis for everything is this. Do not make assumptions based on your own male perspective, but actively ask for the perspectives of those that are affected and learn from them. Because often as outsiders, we do make assumptions that either completely miss the actual needs or in the worst case, make things even worse. So we could shorten this talk considerably and summarize it by saying, man, ask your female colleagues how you can help them and do your best to put these wishes into practice. But of course, I don't want to make that easy for myself. So that's why I ask people in my immediate circle for topics and examples that we can contribute here and now as very concrete examples of really good male allyship. And that doesn't just start in the office, but it starts at home, in relationships, in the family, and in social circles. And one example is proactively taking on the so-called non-promotable work. So tasks that do not directly contribute to a career development, visibility, or a promotion. And these tasks are often invisible. They are time-consuming and most of the time unevenly distributed, and often involving extra work and putting women at a disadvantage. And after all, those who take on too many of these tasks have less time for the strategic tasks, such as networking, innovative projects, or similar activities that are crucial for promotions and career advancement. And the paradox is that if no one does these non-promotional tasks, the team dynamic breaks completely down. But those who do them are not rewarded. So in private life, this can include things like organizing birthday presents, doing the housework, or organizing get-togethers with mutual friends. And however, these can also be transferred to the professional context and include, for example, some kind of administrative tasks, such as taking minutes or organizing meetings, including tidying up afterwards, or doing service roles such as fetching coffee, booking rooms for events, etc. And men can and should proactively take on all these tasks, thereby contributing to an equal distribution of these non-promotable tasks. And as men, we contribute in different ways. For example, by showing appreciation and including these non-promotable tasks in performance reviews. For example, by saying, thank you for taking care on the onboarding, that really helped the team. But we can also get actively involved and say, I'll take the minutes today, you give the presentation. And this automatically creates more visibility for the women on the team. And in this way, we relieve our female colleagues. We show them appreciation for their work, and eventually automatically question old entrenched structures in our society, such as why women always make the coffee. But there are also other points. And another important point is to be mindful of situations in which, albeit unintentionally, the focus shifts back to men. And this can happen in simple conversations between men and women, which, as soon as a second man joins the conversation, end up being just conversations between the men, with the women merely present rather than actively involved. And here we can ensure inclusion with little effort by just conducting conversations in such a way that all participants are adequately involved. And however, this also means paying attention to our own manners. And this applies to both our private and professional lives. And often in teams that are heavily male-dominated, but also even in fairly balanced teams, you can observe some kind of boy club behavior. And this means that little attention is paid to the fact that statements can be hurtful to women or marginalized groups. And this starts with a sexist joke that are only meant to be humorous and ends with structural sexism and microaggressions, such as you explained that very well for women, which implies incompetence, or can you smile as a question, which objectifies the women in that case. And here it is our duty as men to intervene in such inappropriate behavior, and in the best case, to explain in a kind and friendly tone to our colleagues why these jokes are not funny and never have been, and then that there are humorous things that do not lead to groups of people being marginalized or hurt. And in other cases, there are also physical transgressions, such as unwanted touching, from harmless arm around the shoulder to hugs that last unnecessarily long to accidental brushing against explicit body parts. And these are still deeply rooted in our society. And of course, they are not an industry-specific problem, let's make that clear. But nevertheless, it's our duty as progressive men to address these abuses, educate others about them, and collectively contribute to improving the situation. And I therefore appeal to every man to take these issues very seriously, to intervene as soon as they witness them, and to take a clear stand for women and those affected, rather than engaging in victim blaming or perpetuator victim reversal for their own benefit. And the inclusive language can also help to create a working atmosphere in which everyone in the team feels comfortable. Gender-neutral language is a wonderful way to include as many realities of life as possible and exclude as few as possible. And fortunately, there are many linguistic options for making gender-neutral language accessible to a broad audience, if you want to. But I mean, what's the argument against it? We are evolving in every respect and aspect, so why not linguistically as well? But all of this may seem kind of overwhelming at first to many who until now have not yet dealt with the topic of male allyship in such depth. But you don't have to tackle the whole catalog right away. You can start with small steps that will already bring about important change. And to give you that little push to take the first steps, I've prepared a few examples that anyone can start with today without having to be perfect. And the first one is practice active listening. So at your next meeting, count how often women are interrupted and intervene, not by speaking for them, but by saying something like, please let finish. And this is the amplification effect. For example, that was implemented in the Obama White House, among other places. And there, men deliberately repeated the ideas of their female colleagues to give them more weight. And in addition, we can specifically involve women in such situations. And this already works by asking them specifically what they think about a particular issue. The second point is recognize and use privileges. So ask yourself, when did I use a privilege today without thinking about it? Was I treated less critically because of my gender? Did I get an opportunity that a woman would not have gotten? For example, promotion in salary negotiations or in terms of a network access. And we can also share our privilege proactively. So let's use our position to recommend women for projects, lectures, or leadership roles. And a small sentence like, I know someone who could be the perfect role for this, can change careers and also lives. And the third point, make mistakes and also learn from them. And this can take many different forms. For example, very few years ago, I called a colleague girl, and she corrected me. And at first, I was offended until I realized it's not about me, it's about becoming better. So if you say something wrong, apologize and do better next time. And this also means being uncomfortable or putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. And there will be moments when you feel uncomfortable because you intervene, because you make a stand or you take a stand. But the change starts where it hurts. And as Melinda Gates said, male allyship is not a marathon, it's a daily sprint. So let's try to get better every day and take a small step toward finally achieving gender equality. And to take some ending notes, I would like to conclude with 3 points. It's kind of a takeaway message for everyone, but especially for the men among us. And at first, it's the 1% rule, which means change 1% of your behavior today. And this could like followed. Write the meeting notes today so that a female colleague can present them. Or praise a woman for her work once a week publicly. Don't ignore a sexist remark, address it. 1% sounds like very little, but if 100 men do it, it's a revolution. The second part is the allyship pact. Find another man in your circle, whether it's private or professional. This could be a colleague, a friend, your father, or your brother, it doesn't matter. Hold each other accountable and ask each other regularly, what have you done for equality lately? How have you actively supported women in your own circle and vice versa? And last but not least, it's the long-time vision. And imagine we create a world where our daughters have the same opportunities as our sons, where our sons can cry and show their feelings without being considered weak, a world where we can all, regardless of gender, decide who we want to be. And that may sound utopian, but it's possible. And we can be the beginning of it. Because, as I said in the keynote speech at this year's International Colloquium on Refractories, male allyship is essential for achieving sustainable diversity. And you don't have to be queer to fight for queer rights. You don't have to be a minority to fight fascism. And you don't have to be a woman to fight for women's rights. So thank you very much for listening, and cheers, everyone.